Welcome to Avoidant Decoded, where we uncover the hidden emotions behind avoidant behavior, decode the silence, distance, and mixed signals, and help you understand what may really be happening beneath the surface of the person you care about. If you've ever wondered what an avoidant feels but struggles to say, you're in the right place, so stay with me, because today's message may change the way you see their silence forever. One of the biggest misconceptions about avoidant people is that distance automatically means indifference. When someone pulls away, becomes quiet, or acts as though they no longer need you, it is easy to assume they have forgotten you and moved on. But sometimes the person who appears the most detached is actually the one privately thinking about you far more than you could ever imagine. Their silence may not mean the connection disappeared. Sometimes it means they don't know what to do with the feelings that remain. If you've ever cared deeply about someone who kept moving closer and then suddenly creating distance, what you're about to understand may completely change the way you interpret their behavior, because what an avoidant person shows on the outside can be very different from what is happening internally. Their public behavior may look calm, independent, and unaffected, while their private world can be filled with memories, questions, longing, conflict, and emotions they don't know how to express. So let's look at what can actually happen when an avoidant person genuinely misses someone. I'm not talking about the version they show friends, family, or even you. I'm talking about those quiet moments when the day is over, the distractions disappear, and they are finally left alone with their own thoughts. Many people assume avoidant individuals simply don't feel emotions as deeply as other people. That's not necessarily true. Avoidance isn't the absence of emotion. In many cases, it's a learned way of managing emotion. Some avoidant people can experience attachment, longing, love, sadness, and fear very intensely. The difference is that somewhere along the way, they learned that depending on another person could be dangerous. Perhaps affection was inconsistent when they were younger. Maybe comfort wasn't always available when they needed it. Perhaps expressing vulnerability resulted in rejection, criticism, disappointment, or emotional distance. Over time, their nervous system learned a powerful lesson. Relying on other people might lead to pain, so being independent feels safer. Eventually, that strategy can become part of their identity. They learn to tell themselves that they are better alone. They become proud of being self-sufficient. They learn not to ask for too much, not to reveal too much, and not to allow another person to become too important. Then someone enters their life who actually matters. At first, the connection may feel exciting. They enjoy the attention, they enjoy being understood, they enjoy having someone who makes them feel seen. But when that relationship starts becoming emotionally significant, something inside them can shift. The same closeness that once felt comforting can suddenly begin to feel threatening. An old internal alarm starts sending a message. If this person becomes important to me, what happens if I lose them? That fear can create distance. They may become quieter. They may suddenly need more alone time. They may throw themselves into work, hobbies, entertainment, or other responsibilities. Small problems in the relationship may suddenly become extremely important. Things they previously ignored can become reasons to question the entire connection, and you may be left wondering what happened. You may start asking yourself whether you said something wrong, whether you became too available, whether you weren't attractive enough, interesting enough, patient enough, or lovable enough. But in many cases, the wall you're experiencing did not begin with you. You simply became close enough for an old protective pattern to become activated. And here's the part most people never see. Eventually, the day ends, the work is finished, the conversations stop, the phone becomes quiet, the television goes off, the room becomes still, and all the distractions that helped them avoid their emotions during the day are suddenly gone. That's when feelings they pushed away can begin to surface. It may not immediately look like heartbreak. It might begin as restlessness. They walk around without really knowing what they're looking for. They pick up their phone, check it, put it down, and repeat the process. They open an app without any real purpose. They start watching something and lose interest. They move from one distraction to another because sitting quietly with their own thoughts feels uncomfortable. There is something underneath all of it that they don't want to identify, because if they name the feeling, they may have to admit the truth. They miss you. And admitting that can feel frightening for someone who has spent years convincing themselves that needing people is dangerous. So instead of sitting with the emotion, they distract themselves. They scroll through social media. They watch another episode. They message a friend. They occupy themselves with work. They look through random posts. They search for something, anything, that can pull their attention away from the feeling growing inside them. Sometimes it works, at least temporarily. Then something reminds them of you. A song comes on that you once listened to together. They see something funny and immediately think you would have laughed at it. They discover something interesting, and their first instinct is to send it to you. For a brief moment, their emotional defenses drop, and they feel the connection again. Then the fear returns. That is what makes longing complicated for an avoidant person. Missing someone can make them feel emotionally exposed. It reminds them that another human being has the ability to affect their emotional state. And if independence has been their main source of safety, that realization can feel threatening. So they shut the feeling down again. They may start talking to someone else. They might answer messages they had ignored. They could spend more time online or even browse dating apps without genuinely wanting a new relationship. From the outside, you might interpret that as proof that they have completely moved on. But sometimes distraction is not the same thing as replacement. Sometimes it's simply an attempt to escape discomfort. They're trying to feel in control instead of sitting with emotions that make them feel vulnerable. Yet even after all the distractions, some part of their mind can continue returning to you. And interestingly, avoidant people may spend more time revisiting the past than imagining a future. The future requires hope. Hope creates uncertainty. And uncertainty can bring the possibility of disappointment or loss. Memories, however, have already happened. They are known. They can be revisited without creating the same level of uncertainty. So their mind may return to small moments, not necessarily the dramatic conversations, not the biggest romantic gestures. Sometimes it's something incredibly ordinary. The way you laughed at something unexpected, the comfortable silence between you, a random conversation that somehow became deeper than either of you intended, the look you gave them when they were talking, the feeling of sitting beside you without having to perform or explain themselves. Those moments can remain surprisingly powerful. They may never tell you about them, but that doesn't mean the memories disappeared. Late at night, when their defenses become weaker, their mind can wander back to those experiences. They may remember the moments when they felt accepted without pressure. They may remember how easy it felt to be around you before fear became involved. And then there is another behavior many people overlook. They may check on you without actually contacting you. They might look at your profile. They may watch your stories. They may notice whether you're active. They may quietly observe what you're doing without ever starting a conversation. You might never know they're doing it. They may tell themselves it's simple curiosity, but sometimes they're looking for reassurance that you're still there. They want to know you're okay. They want to know whether you've completely disappeared from their world. They want to maintain some connection without having to take the emotional risk of openly reaching for you. This is one of the contradictions of avoidant attachment. They can want closeness while simultaneously being afraid of closeness. They can miss someone and still avoid contacting them. They can care about someone and still create distance. They may want the comfort of knowing you're available without having to expose how much your presence actually matters to them. Then the phone goes down. The room becomes quiet again, and that's when everything they've been avoiding can become much harder to escape. They may lie awake feeling several emotions at once: longing, sadness, fear, frustration, confusion, and sometimes even anger. But the anger isn't always directed at you. Sometimes it's directed inward. Deep down, they may recognize that they walked away from someone who genuinely mattered. They may realize that the distance they created wasn't necessarily because the relationship was wrong. Sometimes it was because emotional closeness activated fears they didn't know how to manage. That realization can be painful. They may become frustrated with themselves because they don't understand why they keep repeating the same pattern. They may want connection but struggle to tolerate the vulnerability required to maintain it. So they remain stuck. They feel something, become uncomfortable, suppress it, create distance, miss the person, consider reaching out, become afraid, and then retreat again. Familiar loneliness can feel safer than unfamiliar vulnerability, and this pattern may have existed long before you entered their life. If you're listening because there is someone like this in your life, I want you to remember something important. You may have spent hours wondering what you could have done differently. You may have replayed conversations in your mind. You may have analyzed every message, every silence, every change in their behavior. You may have believed that if you could just understand them better, love them more patiently, or become the one person they trusted completely, they would finally stop running. That desire is understandable. When we care about someone, we naturally want to believe our love can heal what hurts them. But you cannot love another person out of an avoidant attachment pattern. You cannot do their emotional healing for them. Your patience cannot replace their willingness to look at themselves. Your consistency cannot force them to confront fears they've spent years avoiding. And your love cannot make someone emotionally available if they are not prepared to develop that capacity themselves. Avoidance is not a puzzle you solve by trying harder. It can be a deeply established protective pattern, and meaningful change requires the person to recognize that pattern and become willing to work through it. That is why you should never interpret someone's emotional distance as proof that you are not enough. Their inability to get close does not automatically mean you weren't lovable. Their withdrawal doesn't erase the connection you experienced. And if they lie awake missing you but still don't contact you, that doesn't automatically mean they don't care. Sometimes it means their fear is stronger than their ability to act on what they feel. They may have built emotional walls for protection, but eventually those walls can become a prison. The tragic part is that the person inside may still believe the walls are keeping them safe. Many people who desperately want connection are the same people who struggle most to ask for it. Avoidant people are not necessarily born cold or incapable of love. Many learn to suppress certain emotions because at some point shutting down seemed like the safest option. The problem is that a strategy designed to protect someone in one chapter of life can become destructive in another. The original danger may be gone, but the nervous system can continue responding as though it is still there. So the cycle continues. They think about you, they replay conversations, they look at your profile, they consider reaching out, they stop themselves, they feel guilty. Morning comes, the emotional armor returns, and they continue through the day as if the previous night's emotions never happened. Now, if you're currently involved with someone who behaves this way, there are a few things you need to understand. First, pressure usually doesn't create safety. When someone already associates emotional closeness with danger, constant pursuit can intensify their instinct to retreat. The more they feel cornered, the stronger their protective response may become. That doesn't mean you should play games. It doesn't mean you should disappear simply to make them chase you. And it certainly doesn't mean you should manipulate their fears. Instead, build a life that remains meaningful, whether they're present or absent. Spend time with friends, work toward your own goals. Develop interests that have nothing to do with the relationship. Protect your identity. Keep growing as an individual. That isn't a strategy for making them jealous. It's emotional health. Because if your entire life becomes centered around predicting someone's moods, managing their distance, and trying to keep them emotionally comfortable, you eventually stop living your own life. That's not healthy love. That's self-abandonment. The second thing to understand is that emotional stability often creates more trust than dramatic displays of affection. Grand gestures may create temporary excitement, but consistency creates predictability. When your actions match your words, when you remain grounded, and when your care doesn't disappear simply because things become uncomfortable, you demonstrate something important. You're emotionally reliable. An avoidant person may not immediately acknowledge it. They may not even understand why it feels different. But consistent behavior can communicate safety in a way that intense emotional moments often cannot. The third thing is learning how to communicate emotions without turning them into demands. You don't have to pretend you don't have feelings. You can say, "I've been thinking about you," without demanding that they immediately give you reassurance. You can explain that something hurt you without attacking their character. Instead of saying, "You always do this," you can say, "When you disappear without explaining what's happening, I feel disconnected and uncertain." The emotion remains honest. The delivery becomes healthier. And if you've already stepped away from an avoidant person, there is another important dynamic to understand. When you genuinely stop chasing someone, not as a tactic, but because you've decided to respect your own boundaries, the emotional situation can change. As long as you were always available, they could focus primarily on protecting themselves. Your presence was predictable, so they didn't necessarily have to confront what losing you would actually feel like. But when your presence becomes uncertain, the reality of the separation can become harder to ignore. That's when memories may become stronger. That's when they may start checking your profile more frequently. That's when the silence can begin to feel heavier. Because your absence creates space for feelings that your constant presence may have allowed them to avoid. Even then, however, they may not reach out. And that's one of the hardest truths. Missing you does not guarantee action. Someone can genuinely care about you and still lack the emotional capacity to build a healthy relationship. Fear can remain stronger than longing. They may want to say, "I miss you." They may want to admit, "I handled this badly." They may even know they made a mistake. But vulnerability can feel so threatening that remaining silent seems easier. Eventually, some people do reach a point where the pain of separation becomes greater than the fear of vulnerability. But don't expect a dramatic movie-style confession. Often, it starts very simply. They might send a funny image, they might mention an old memory, they might say something like, "This reminded me of you." They may send a casual question that appears almost meaningless. For someone else, that message might seem insignificant. For an avoidant person, it can represent a major internal decision. They may have spent hours debating whether they should contact you. They may have written and deleted messages. They may have worried about being rejected or appearing too needy. So the final message may be deliberately casual because casual feels safer. It gives them a way to reconnect without exposing everything they feel. What happens after that matters. If you immediately respond with overwhelming emotion, demand answers, or try to restore the entire relationship in one conversation, they may become frightened and retreat again. The opening is delicate. That doesn't mean you have to walk on eggshells. It means you can respond with warmth without abandoning your boundaries. You can be glad to hear from them without making them responsible for your emotional stability. You can welcome the conversation without forcing immediate commitment. You can leave space for connection without chasing it. That balance takes emotional maturity. You don't need to punish them for their past behavior, but you also shouldn't reward an unhealthy cycle by immediately accepting the same pattern again. Now let's step back. Understanding what happens inside an avoidant person's mind can be useful. It can help you stop taking every withdrawal personally. It can give you compassion for someone whose behavior may come from fear rather than cruelty. But understanding them should never require you to abandon yourself. Ask yourself a very honest question. Is this relationship actually giving you enough? Not enough, according to your fantasies about who they might become. Not enough according to the occasional moments when everything feels perfect. Enough according to what you consistently experience. Are there affection, communication, stability, mutual effort, emotional availability, and respect? Or have you become so focused on explaining their behavior that you've stopped noticing your own unmet needs? Understanding someone's attachment style doesn't mean you must tolerate a relationship that repeatedly leaves you lonely. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do and still decide that their behavior is not healthy enough for you. You can have compassion for their wounds while protecting your own heart. You can love someone and still let them go. You can understand their fear without making their fear your responsibility. That isn't cruelty, that's emotional wisdom. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can say is something simple and honest. I understand that closeness is difficult for you. I can see that there is fear behind some of the ways you respond, but I also have emotional needs. And I can't continue pretending that those needs don't matter. That isn't a threat. It isn't manipulation. It's simply honesty. And surprisingly, calm honesty can be very powerful for someone who is used to either emotional pressure or complete tolerance of their distance. Many avoidant people become accustomed to two extremes. Someone either accepts the emotional distance indefinitely or eventually becomes frustrated and explodes. What they may rarely experience is a person who can hold compassion and boundaries at the same time. Someone who can say, I care about you, I understand you, and I still respect myself. That combination can feel unfamiliar. It can show them that intimacy doesn't have to mean losing freedom, and boundaries don't automatically mean rejection. Will that guarantee that they change? No. Nothing can guarantee another person's healing. Change ultimately depends on their willingness to recognize their patterns, take responsibility for them, and do the work necessary to build a healthier way of relating. But your calmness, honesty, and boundaries can create an environment where genuine growth is possible without sacrificing yourself in the process. So let's return to that quiet moment at night. The avoidant person is alone. They're thinking about you. They're replaying memories they haven't admitted they still carry. Maybe they're looking at your profile without saying anything. Maybe they feel the urge to contact you and then convince themselves not to. Maybe they're remembering a conversation, a laugh, a simple moment when being around you felt easier than usual. Maybe they're frustrated with themselves because they know they pushed away someone who mattered. They may feel more than they ever show. They may miss you more than they would ever admit. They may want closeness while simultaneously fearing what closeness could cost them. And underneath much of it is fear. Fear of dependence, fear of rejection, fear of losing control, fear of being hurt, and sometimes fear that allowing someone into their world means giving that person the power to break their heart. Understanding this can be comforting because it reminds you that the connection you experienced may not have been imaginary. What you felt could have been real. What you shared could have mattered. Their feelings may have been genuine even when their behavior was confusing. But there is one final truth you must never forget. Real feelings are not enough to create a healthy relationship. Love alone cannot replace communication. Chemistry cannot replace emotional availability. Missing someone cannot replace consistency. And genuine attachment cannot replace mutual effort. A relationship becomes healthy when both people are willing to participate in it, communicate honestly, respect each other's needs, and take responsibility for their own emotional growth. So if an avoidant person misses you tonight, that may explain some of their silence. It may explain why they remember you, why they check on you from a distance, or why they struggle to reach out even when part of them wants to. But their internal feelings are their responsibility. Your responsibility is to decide what kind of relationship you are willing to accept. Don't spend your entire life trying to prove that you're safe enough for someone who refuses to step toward you. Don't measure your worth by someone's ability to receive love. And don't confuse someone's fear of intimacy with a reason to keep abandoning your own needs. You can understand them without losing yourself. You can care without chasing. You can remain compassionate while maintaining boundaries. And sometimes the most powerful form of love is not convincing someone to stay. It's having enough self-respect to allow them to choose growth for themselves while you continue choosing peace for yourself. If this message helped you understand an avoidant person in a different way, share it with someone who may need that perspective. And if you've ever experienced that strange silence where someone seemed completely unaffected, while you later realized they may have been struggling privately, remember this: distance doesn't always mean the absence of feeling. Sometimes it means someone doesn't yet know how to face what they feel. Thank you for spending this time with Avoidant Decoded. If you haven't subscribed yet, join us for more conversations about attachment, emotional patterns, relationships, healing, and the psychology behind the behaviors that often leave us confused. Sometimes understanding what happens beneath the surface doesn't change another person, but it can change the way you understand yourself, your boundaries, and the kind of love you deserve.